allow African Americans into her home on the front door. And her husband would get up in mid-conversation sometimes and leave. The most prosperous and famous individual of art in archery, which is where the Boyhood Farm, the Jimmy Carter Boyhood Farm resides, was an African-American minister and businessman. He used to have his driver pull up to the front of the property where the mailbox was and beat the horn. He would not get out because he would not walk to the back because he thought that was beneath him. But he also knew that Mr. Carter would not allow him to come to the front door. So they had sort of a little détente where they would both meet on the front lawn. And they were perfectly nice, but despite the fact that this man was a very wealthy man, he was not permitted into a white man's home as a guest. And this was something that Lillian Carter despised in her husband. And it was something that Jimmy Carter grew to resent. And by the time he went off into the Navy, he identified himself, I think, more as a Gordy, which was his mother's maiden family, than a Carter. And the two men, father and son, became very estranged. And Jimmy Carter was not going to be a farmer. The peanut farmer was not going to be a farmer. He wanted to be the head of naval operations. He married a wife. They had a wonderful existence as a naval family. They had 3 boys. And then Jimmy Carter got the news that his father had pancreatic cancer. And there is something with men and their sons who are estranged when all of a sudden you realize that bitterness and hate that you think you have for your father, you realize that it's a poor substitute for fatherly affection. And he realized that he had very little time left with his dad. And so he came home and he nursed his dad, who was on his deathbed. And what he saw was this huge mass of humanity, of all of these African Americans who would come in to tell Jimmy that they would have been homeless, but that his father had held the mortgages to their property, and that they'd never paid him for years, that he took care of it, that all of these people, their children, got surgeries that they needed, or glasses, or went to school, or shoes. Every year, just dozens of people were being provided by Mr. Earl, his father. And he never talked about it. He wanted no fanfare. He just did what he thought was right. And Jimmy forgave his father, and he realized that he had all of these degrees in nuclear science. He had a commission to go to the Navy from Congress because he was with the Seawolf nuclear submarines, which was very elite. You had to get congressional approval to resign.
Right, he was with Admiral Rickover, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And yet here was his father, who was very successful by the terms of South Georgia, but in reality, his son had vastly surpassed him professionally. And here Jimmy was thinking, my God, if I were to drop dead right now, nobody would care. And here's my father, and two counties are going into mourning because this man is about to die. And the counties of Sumter County and Quitman County, which was an adjacent county, I mean, there were people who were in absolute terror that this man was going to die, and they didn't know how they were going to live because he was no longer going to be there. And it was a turning point for Jimmy Carter, and he decided, I'm gonna take up that mantle. And so that was one of the turning points of Jimmy Carter's life. And I think you see a shift for the next 25 years where Jimmy emulates his father more than his mother. He becomes more conservative. He becomes more cautious. He becomes, I'd say, a little bit more strict. And he has a moral elasticity during this period that culminates with his successful gubernatorial campaign in Georgia, where he essentially runs as a staunch conservative who courted the racist vote, for a lack of a better. I mean, he just did. He was not Jimmy Carter in that race. He tried it in 1966. He tried to be Jimmy Carter, and they thought he was too liberal. So he said, "Well, then I'm going to run as a clone of Lester Maddox." He won, and then as soon as he got into office and became governor, you then see a slight leaning towards Miss Lillian again, and he reaffirms his belief in not only civil rights but human rights.
Right. The 1970 race, actually, I mean, in 66 he had run and lost the primary to Lester Maddox, who was a staunch segregationist. It's just so our listeners understand the context. 1970, his major rival was Carl Sanders, who had been considered a moderate, really a liberal Democrat by Georgia standards, when he had previously been governor 10 years earlier or so, 8 years earlier. So Carter moved to the right in that 1970 election and beat Sanders in the Democratic primary.
And it's very interesting because this is something that happened only in the 1970 race, where Jimmy Carter did not win a majority of the African American vote. Even in 1980, when he lost to Reagan by 10 points, and he failed to get the 6 points of the Anderson vote, which was really a lot of them were liberal Republicans and liberal Democrats that voted for him in 76. He still got something like 80% of the African American vote. Jimmy Carter always did extremely well with African Americans. The one time he didn't was when he ran as a Lester Maddox conservative. And then as soon as he comes in to office, in his inauguration, he made that famous remark where he said, "The time of racial discrimination is over." And he became the symbol of the New South. He was on Times Magazine. And from then on, you see an individual who takes after more of the mother. And nowadays you see this individual who, as he's older, he realizes that he has virtually no time. He's running out of time. He talks about it often. I'm running out of time. And he is almost a carbon copy of Miss Lillian. He has no patience for you if you're foolish, if you are a braggart, if you think you're more clever than you are. He has no patience for people who are on the wrong side of history. He has no patience for people that are, basically spilling malarkey. He's just a very earnest person. He does not mince words. And he's the black sheep of the former president fraternity, if you will, because when one of them ticks him off, he will say it. He's a very big supporter of Barack Obama, but he is very anti-drones, and he goes out of his way to address that. He's very good friends with H.W. Bush, but he went behind H.W. Bush's back to talk to members of the Security Council and the UN to try and get a resolution to stop the invasion in Iraq.
Right.
And very, very famously, for those eight years where there was not a Democratic president, for a lot of people, he was this huge vocal critic of W. Bush.
Right.
On so many issues that he was basically not permitted for quite a long time to set foot in the White House. And very famously, when Barack Obama comes into office, they have that very famous gathering in January of 2009 where, all the living presidents in the Oval. Obama sent word to the Bush White House saying, arrange this meeting gather everybody to come. And the W White House called back and they said, well, HW would be thrilled, and so would Clinton, but do we have to have Carter? And Obama called back and said, yes, it has to be Carter. And they said, but for God's sake, he's been so rotten to us. And he said, Carter has to come. If you look at his involvement in the past two national Democratic conventions, he was forbidden to speak in 2008. They had a video montage, a tribute to him that was aired on C-SPAN.
This raises an excellent.
Okay.
Yeah, this raises an excellent point because, well, just for our listeners who may not be aware of this, after he lost the 1980 election, and a big part of him losing the 1980 election was John Anderson's independent candidacy. John Anderson was a very liberal Republican member of Congress from Illinois who peeled off enough votes in enough states that it made a difference. The Democratic Party, by and large, rejected Jimmy Carter, and I even remember reading Colin Powell's autobiography that he wrote in the mid-'90s where he talked about President Clinton when Colin Powell and Jimmy Carter went down to Haiti to try and intervene to prevent a U.S. invasion or resistance to a U.S. invasion to restore the Aristide government. Powell made 2 points. One, that the generals in Haiti, in the junta, had an incredible amount of respect for Jimmy Carter, which was striking to me that Powell was writing it at the time when Powell had just left active service in the military, or had just left the Joint Chief of Staff. The second point he made was that President Clinton had called Powell behind Jimmy Carter's back and said, look, anytime he gets involved in something, he's not following American policy, he's not following my policy, I'd like you to represent the United States and peel back the excesses. Powell actually let Carter take the lead. He didn't listen to Clinton. But there was this resentment of Jimmy Carter among a lot of establishment Democrats. And then I think we got into this era of empire and wars and hubris, and to the point where I would say among Democrats, core Democrats, not the mass electorate who seem to like Bill Clinton, among core Democrats, Jimmy Carter is the far more popular individual in the Democratic Party than Bill Clinton.
I would totally agree with you. And a few points is that. One, Jimmy Carter made the tragic mistake that for whatever reason, Democrats who claim to be so tolerant, such a tolerant bunch, have no tolerance for, and that is that he lost re-election. So
right.
He was ignored. He was ignored for a long time, and it didn't make matters worse that his vice president distanced himself in '84 and was trounced by Ronald Reagan.
Right, and they continued to run against Carter, the Republicans, in '84 and '88, which, then in the minds of a lot of these establishment Democrats who, as you said, I love the terminology, claim to be so tolerant, Bill Clinton became their patron saint. But then once you peel back the political benefit of Bill Clinton versus Jimmy Carter, you realize your ideology, your heart, your emotion is more connected to the Carter legacy, and I think that's where we are today.
Well, and I would say that my generation of Democrats is this strange mix between Carter and Obama, and there is a lot more respect for Carter and Obama as presidents. We have a lot of respect for Clinton, but as a campaigner. When it comes to the president, there's just this feeling of what might have been. And, with Carter, he lost re-election, and Clinton got re-election, but there was these 2 terms of just crisis mode, of just survival mode. And
I have to. Let me just jump in for a second here and say, and we're going to talk about this on the site soon, also in the next week or two. I just rewatched the PBS documentaries, the American